moment really came at my wedding. So at my wedding, my mom had been about 5 years into her diagnosis, and my dad really protected her. So my dad had made their world really small and would really only have my mom participate in social settings in the home or with small groups of people because he was clearly pretty aware of how challenging it was for her to be in social settings, and she was experiencing incontinence. So by being at home, he could kind of control those factors. My wedding was a day where he didn't have control.
Welcome to Desperately Seeking Senior Living, a podcast for sons, daughters, grandkids, spouses, and all caregivers who suddenly find themselves tangled in the search for senior living and care. If you like today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and check out our doable download in today's show notes for a printable summary of the show and a bonus tip. Former caregiver for her parents and full-time caregiver for her mom who had mixed dementia. Advocate for children, those with dementia, and their caregivers, including younger caregivers. Patti LaFleur gave up her full-time position as a kindergarten teacher to become her mom, Linda's, full-time caregiver. But she would never say she gave up a thing. For Patti, who you may also know as Miss Patty Cake, she received as much from her mom as she gave. And then she shared it with all of us. In this episode, Patti shares her journey, grief at losing both parents, love, and finding joy when it's hard. I'm your host, Valerie Lynn, and this is Patti's story. You're listening to our doable tips, short answers to your questions. Don't see your question listed? Send us a note. Then don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an answer. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I am so excited to have you. You have such a passion for caregivers. You have become such a light for other family caregivers, especially other young caregivers. We're not going to say your age, but you're young, younger than me.
Yeah, I mean, I was young when the journey started.
Exactly. So tell us a little bit about your journey. When was the first time that you really realized that, oh my gosh, I'm a caregiver?
Definitely.
How did that happen?
Yeah, so my mom got diagnosed about 12 years ago with dementia, but we had noticed brain change before that had happened. But my dad cared for her. So my dad was her primary care partner for about 7 years, and I just really identified as a daughter at that point. So I was the one that maybe helped my dad or came and visited my dad, but my dad took on a bulk of the responsibility. Sadly, my dad ended up getting sick. He wasn't taking care of himself as he was walking this care partner journey. And so he ended up in the hospital, and my mom moved in with me overnight. We just thought it was going to be temporary, that she was just going to stay here for a couple days. But really, my dad's health just didn't improve in a way that we felt comfortable or safe for my mom to move back in with him. So he ended up moving into a care facility, and my mom moved in with my husband, and I became a caregiver overnight and really started identifying as a caregiver pretty immediately because she required 24/7 care at that point, and the responsibility really fell on myself and my husband as my support.
Wow. That is so many families' stories, because oftentimes, right, the caregiver ends up getting sicker than the one they're caring for, or like you're saying, they're giving so much and they're not, taking care of their own needs. And the other thing that comes up are those surprises, because they also cover for their spouse. Were there things that you didn't know, and then all of a sudden your dad's sick and you're like, this is way worse than I thought?
Honestly, that moment really came at my wedding. So at my wedding, my mom had been about 5 years into her diagnosis, and my dad really protected her. So my dad had made their world really small and would really only have my mom participate in social settings in the home or with small groups of people because he was clearly pretty aware of how challenging it was for her to be in social settings, and she was experiencing incontinence. So by being at home, he could kind of control those factors. My wedding was a day where he didn't have control over the day. There was a lot of people, there was a lot of busyness. She was going to be away from home long enough that they needed to have a bathroom break that was going to be where she needed support. So my wedding became a huge indicator for myself and for my family and for our friends that my mom needed a lot more care than my dad had. And so that really is kind of when I started to step up as a helpful daughter or helpful support for my dad. But it wasn't that I was her full-time care partner, but that was really one of those moments where we were all like, wait, this is actually what's going on. Ooh, they need help.
Wow. I can't even imagine. Did your friends protect you on that day? Did you find out after that day?
My friends, so good. In fact, I have many of my friends ended up, you know, talking to my dad or talking to my aunt or helping to really be buffers in that situation. My aunt had ended up crying because of the situation, and one of my girlfriends, one of my very best friends, ended up in the bathroom talking to her for a very long time and helping her process all those emotions. And so, yeah, everyone really buffered, but it was still really clear that things were on a trajectory to be very different. My bridal shower was another indicator. We played one of those games like, who knows the bride the best? And I knew my mom didn't know a lot of those things, but it was really clear how little my mom was able to recall about me and our relationship and what she knew about me. So all of those events kind of came to a breaking point, I guess, in knowing that things were going to be different.
Oh, and what was the timeline there? So that was your wedding. How soon then you became the dutiful daughter and helped out, but how soon did that transition to your dad getting sick?
Yeah, so we got married about 5 years ago now. And so my mom so we got married, and then my husband and I were at the point where we were going to buy a home. And so we had purchased a home that was about 10 minutes away from my parents' house. And that was really when we picked a home that I could pick or that I could drive home from work, and then I could drive by their house every day, stop in, check on them, and then go to our house. So it probably went on for about 2 years where I was really stepping in. And then it just really reached this point where my dad was pretty much unable to care for her on his own. So I'd stop in, once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week. I mean, it just continually grew. I mean, by the end, before he ended up in the hospital, I was probably going there 6 to 7 days a week to just really check in, make sure they had dinner, make sure they had their bills paid, make sure my mom was changed, making sure that everything was settled so that they could be on their own for the 12 hours while I was at work or the 8 hours while I was sleeping.
Oh my gosh. I have to go back to something you said because a lot of caregivers, family caregivers give up a lot to take this role on. Did you just say you chose a house specifically based on its location to your parents?
Definitely. I mean, I'm going to be honest, though. I'm going to be very honest. We're in the general area. So we were looking at homes anywhere within 30 to 45 minutes of my parents' house. And this one specifically just happened to be at a very perfect spot that we could drive home. And my husband and I both loved it. But yes, we definitely, this one went to the top of the list because of its immediate location to my parents' house.
But you love it.
We love it. It worked out great. We're happy. We didn't just you pick it. We still loved it.
But, that brings up another question too, because a lot of families look at location as a really important factor. And when you were in a situation where you needed to find a place, a care setting for your dad, I'm guessing location was one of the big factors for you then.
For sure. But with my dad, location was a little different. So with him,
Yeah.
yeah, we didn't want him to be right nearby. So something that had happened with my dad is that he really tried to control the situation when he was caring for my mom. And with dementia, and she also had type 1 diabetes, a lot of things are out of your control. So he really struggled with how things got out of control in those situations, and he really struggled with giving up the control. He got sick and he was unable to care for her, but he still thought he could care for her.
Yeah.
So for us, it was important that he was close enough that I could get there, but far enough that he didn't have an expectation that I was going to come and get him every day and he was going to help me care for her. It was just this perfect, like 30-minute distance where it was convenient. We could go there 2 to 5 times a week, but far enough away that we didn't go there 7 days a week.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love that so much. I think not only is that important logistically, but I think it's so important too that you gave yourself permission to allow that distance. Because I think a lot of families feel so guilty about some of these decisions.
Definitely.
So
For
I think
sure.
that, yeah, that's so great.
Yeah, and boundaries were really important for me in that situation. Like my dad, although he was unable to care for my mom at that point, he was able to care for himself mostly with some support, right? So we were able to move him into a facility that he was in the independent living aspect
Okay.
of their facility. He had his own apartment. We did have support where they brought him his medication, so that way we could at least eliminate that as something he didn't have to worry about. And, obviously food was also taken care of. So once we eliminated the barrier of medication, caring for my mom, and him having to worry about how he was going to get food, I mean, he really thrived. He made friends, he was social, he was walking, he was exercising, he was active. I mean, he really thrived once all of the other layers that had become barriers for him to really have the mental capacity to enjoy life. So,
Right.
although it was such a hard transition at first for him to really give up that control, once all of those things went away, he was like a brand new guy. We're like, who's this guy? He's like smiling again?
Oh my gosh, I love that. So
Yeah.
how just quickly about that part of your journey, how did you choose a senior living community, which is what you're talking about? Was there someone who helped you? Did you have your own tribe helping you? What was that part of your journey like?
Definitely. Well, I immediately had reached out to any sort of free organization I could find. So I had reached out to like our local area Department of Aging. I had reached out to the Alzheimer's Association. I had gotten in contact with, some people who are senior living specialists to help me do that work. But honestly, it was a little bit challenging to work with their schedule while I was working with my schedule. So at that time I was working full time teaching. I was caring for my mom. I was trying to navigate having a caregiver that was in our home that was supporting us, right? There was so many pieces that it became actually easier for me to be like, okay, I went on a couple tours. I got some advice from some experts, but really I need to just put it in my own hands. I need to swing by on my way after work or take my mom with me. And so it became so much easier to navigate it on my own at that point. And then I knew the kind of things that I really wanted for my dad. And the three factors for us was location, right? Close enough to get there, far enough to have some distance. The second factor was, what did my dad like? So I always thought about what my parents really liked and enjoyed. And I built activities with my mom based on that. And I tried to think about that with my dad. My dad loved golf. He wasn't at a point where he was active enough to golf, but we found a facility that was on a golf course so that he could still watch golf and he could still enjoy that aspect of it. So that was huge. And then my dad also really struggled with entering groups. So it would have been hard for him to be in a care facility that was really established. So we looked for care facilities that were newer, that didn't have as many residents. So then he could be a person that was one of the first people to move into the facility. So, which was so powerful for him. He got to be kind of the old dog on campus, and I helped him. He got to also have kind of a slow introduction to people, right? So he got to meet 10 people, and then he could hold their names. He could take his notes. He could figure that out. Then 5 more people would join, right? So it really allowed him to build relationships as opposed to be in a facility that people had been living there for 10 years, and then he had to try to find his way.
Wow. I really love that. And I know not every family is going to have that benefit of a newer,
Really?
I mean, with the baby
Totally.
boomers, though, there are going to be so many.
There's so many.
In this area, we're in the Seattle area, there are
Yeah.
so many new buildings going up all the time.
Oh.
So what I really love about what you said, because, well, you said a couple of things, because the other thing that has been something just that, I don't, just organically, we've been focusing on the show recently is discovering those things that bring joy or used to bring joy.
Yeah.
How can you bring those to life? Like
Yeah.
you said, right? Physically, your dad couldn't play golf, but you were able to find a place on the golf course.
Yeah.
And then, really being that detective and saying, okay, where is he going to be most comfortable, and finding that new community. So I really love that, because I think, it was so funny. Today I was at Barnes & Noble. I was working. I work from home. So I was working at Barnes & Noble, and there were these two ladies that were talking about their friends who are in assisted living communities and all this different information. And so what I realized in that moment kind of touches on the other thing that you were talking about, which were all the different resources. And it's almost like having a piece to the puzzle from all these different places. And
Yeah.
then you still have to put the puzzle together, because as I was listening to these ladies at Barnes & Noble, they didn't have all the pieces. And I was waiting for that moment to should I go over and just introduce myself?
Yeah, definitely.
Right. And so I think it's commendable that you had the ability to sort of process all of those things and pull all of those pieces together. And there are so many caregivers that are working and, starting a family and, have all of these different elements. So I think those are a couple of really important points that can help caregivers too, is just realizing it's individual, which also I think makes it harder.
For sure. It's like knowing your person, and then, just knowing that you're not always going to have all the answers. And it might not have been the right fit for my dad, right? Like it ended up being the right fit for him. But just knowing that even if you do all the research and you think you made the right decision, like knowing that it might not be the right fit. And it wasn't the right fit for him every day, right? There were times that he was like, I'm leaving. I'm like, well, I know where you're going. I don't mean that you're in jail, but you're not coming here, man. Like, we're full. Our house is full, right? But
Gosh, yeah.
really offering him that space to know that if this isn't the right fit. And, I think that piece that you brought up that's so important is not everyone has access to those resources. And I know we were so fortunate that we did have access to some financial resources that allowed my dad to have a choice of where he lived. So I think naming that is so important. But another thing too, just to say, is that because he moved into a newer facility, they had bonuses. If you wanted to, we saved money by my dad moving into a newer facility because they had move-in bonuses. It was like, you get this month free, you get 3 months free. I mean, it was pretty reasonable for his care that he needed. Now, that's not the same for my mom. My mom had advanced dementia at that point. My mom had type 1 diabetes, so she had to be in a facility that had skilled nursing 24/7. And my mom had other needs, especially as she became in a wheelchair and less mobile, right? So there was a stark difference between paying for the level of care my mom needed and the level of care my dad needed. And my dad was like, I want the cheapest room. I want no view. I want he didn't have a bedroom. He had a studio, with whatever the cheapest, but it allowed him access. We also didn't have to pay. We got an a la carte. So he just only had med management. We didn't have to pay for other pieces. So it worked out beautifully, but that wouldn't have been the case with my mom. I mean, we were getting quoted $14,000 to $18,000 a month for the level of care that she would need. And that's a very different story.
Oh my gosh. Yes, it is. And there are definitely places, yeah, that, wow, there, cost is one of those things, unfortunately, that there's not an even playing field. I will say this, as a state, Washington is so good at having so many options. Yes. So they're not maybe always in the location that you're looking for, but other states are not as lucky. So so I think we're definitely lucky in that sense. But yeah, I mean, that's a big consideration, especially in your case where you had both parents
Yeah, for
going
sure.
to need care. So how did you, like, at what point, so back to the timeline. So you've got your dad settled. This is where your mom was living with you. What did that journey look like? And when did you finally reach that point where you needed to bring in help?
For sure. So, I mean, when she moved in with me, we hired care right away. So, I was teaching at that time. So, I was working full time. And in order for me to work full time and care for my mom, I needed to have a caregiver that could be with her. And so, for about the first year and a half that my mom lived with me, I had a caregiver during the day, and then I worked during the day, and then it gradually got to this point where I was working less and less. I ended up taking kind of a leave, so I was taking 2 days off a week, and I was only working 3 days, so then we only had a caregiver full-time 3 days a week, but that was just care for when I was working. So I didn't have additional care for any time that I wasn't working. So it's not like I had respite care at that point. It's not that I had care so that I could take care of myself or go on vacation or do self-care. It was really just care that allowed for me to continue to work. After my mom fell and broke her hip in April of 21, my husband and I made the decision, because of the level of care my mom needed. She was going to need very intensive care when I was working, and going to be very expensive. We decided that at the end of that school year, so in June, that I was going to step away from the classroom and I was going to be her full-time care partner, because we were a dual income household. We had been planning to have kids at that point anyway. So our plan was that we would at some point go from a dual income to a single income household. So we had money that we had put aside that allowed me to do that. And so then I cared for her. And then in addition, once I started to really take that time for myself and wasn't having a caregiver that was coming in to support me, then that's when I was able to really look at respite care. So I was able to look at having care for my mom that really allowed me to have that break. Instead of looking for care in the home, we started to look for some respite care outside of the home, and we found a beautiful little memory care facility about 10 minutes from our house. And my mom was able to go there for really short stays that allowed for me to have a break and just really, be Patty, because something happened when I was teaching and caring full time is I really felt like I lost my identity to caregiving and my mom.
Absolutely. And I think that's so common. And I know that's something that you talk about in just trying to lift caregivers up, that, having the ability to find a way to
Yeah,
take care of yourself.
for
That's so
sure.
super important. You're absolutely right. That point you talked about, where in-home care just financially is not a viable option. That is the point at which a lot of families do look for another option. And so for you, it was taking a leave from your job and being that full-time caregiver. What was that like?
Honestly, it was really beautiful. It was hard and heartbreaking and exhausting in a very different way. But, when I was caring for her and I was working, I was teaching, right? So I was doing a job where I was holding space for a lot of little people all day long. And I was giving them, about 75% of me. And then I would go home and I would be caring for my mom, who had also a lot of needs and I was holding space for, who I could give 75% of me to. And I felt just really unsuccessful at the end of the day every day, right? Like I wasn't giving my mom all she needed. I wasn't giving myself all I needed. I wasn't giving my students all that they needed. And so basically, I just kind of always felt unsuccessful. So by taking that leave of absence from work and really being able to devote to being her care partner, I was able to feel really successful. So we were able to have fun and laugh and find joy and dance and craft. There were hard days. It was exhausting. There was a lot of grief, but there was also just this beautiful love and connection that we were able to share.
Do you feel like, I mean, I feel like I know the answer to that. Do you feel like your job really helped you care for your mom?
I definitely feel like my job helped me care for my mom because I really intentionally thought about what my students could do, not what my students couldn't do. And so that's what I thought about with my mom. I really prefaced everything that we did together. I thought, okay, so we're going to wash our hands, for example. What can my mom still do? My mom can still put her hand under the water. My mom can still help me turn the sink on. Can my mom fully wash her hands? Probably not. Can my mom dry her hands? Really, drying her hands was probably the hardest part. But there were elements of everything that we did all day that she could still do. And so, how could I intentionally set up situations, questions, opportunities for really her to maintain dignity and find a way to find her voice and her ability to do things that she could still do, you know? And so, I think because of the way that I thought about people and empowering people and positioning learners, it allowed for me to really think of my mom in that way. And then also, a whole part of early childhood education is this idea of self-regulation and calm down strategies and really thinking about behavior as communication. Fully believe that behavior is communication in any age. And so because of that just being my mindset, I didn't think like my mom is trying to make life hard for me. My mom is doing this because she is trying to just really make things hard. Like that's not why she's doing it. She's having a harder time in the situation than I am. So how can I think about the triggers? How can I meet her where she is? How can I really provide a beautiful opportunity for her to feel her feelings, but then support her along the way?
I absolutely love that. And I just want to say to our listeners right now who are caregiving at home that those bad days are right. That's okay. It's okay to
Oh,
have those negative emotions. But what you just said is really, you don't have to be a teacher to do that, to just flip it and think not what can my mom not do, but what can she do?
yeah,
And and then like you were talking about the communication piece, which I think honestly is sometimes the hardest part because, we're all used to speaking to our loved ones in certain ways our whole lives. And then dementia comes in and steals that.
yeah.
And so you have to take that step back and you have to be purposeful, about how you handle those situations. But I really love that because I think just that simple tip, could help caregivers so much.
Totally. And it's not to say it's not important to recognize what she could not do still. I mean, she couldn't, giving her a pair of scissors or giving her a knife was not probably my smartest choice. So, like, from a safety aspect, it was important to recognize that there were things that she can't do. But it was really important when I thought about like getting dressed is a really good example, right? So often getting dressed, especially when she was living with my dad, became something that was being done to her, not something that she was participating in. So when she first moved in with me, that looked like her helping to pull her pants up or her helping to put her socks on or her helping to put her shoes on. As the disease progressed, it didn't look like I was going to let her try to still pull up her pants. That wasn't something that she could safely do. It wasn't something that we could do. But she could pick between a blue pair of pants and a pink pair of pants. She could make that choice. That's what she could do, right? So how can I also honor that there's so much that you have to do in a day? So where are those moments, right? That was a quick moment. picking between the pink pants and the blue pants, that was quick. Did she need to pick her socks and her shoes that day? Not necessarily, right? But she got to pick one part of her outfit, and that was huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And just all of those little things in general, I think are helpful because the disease changes, right? So what works today doesn't work tomorrow. So focusing more on just the big picture, I think is also really helpful. Now, how long were you in that? Did you ever move your mom to another location, like into a community, or she was always with you?
So she lived with my husband and I for the 2.5 years until she passed. She did go to the respite care. So probably for the last 6 months, she went every 6 weeks within every 6 weeks where she would go and do respite care for 4 days or 4 to 7 days at a time. But was able, which I felt really fortunate to live with my husband and I until she passed. So she passed in our home.
My gosh, and I'm so sorry. I lost my dad in 2007 and I was with him when he took his last breath. And I think it's one of those experiences that you can't really explain unless you've been there. Because
Totally.
I always say it was a beautiful and a painful moment at exactly the same time.
Totally. Heartbreakingly beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. And let's talk a little bit about that because I think sometimes it's easy to get lost in the caregiving, the job, and it's sometimes hard to prepare yourself for that grief part of the journey. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was felt exceptionally hard for us on our journey because of how short, I would say, her late stages were. So my mom pretty quickly in her journey, I feel like went from the early stages to the middle stages. I would say she spent about 9 years in the middle stages, really because her later stages were so short. We went to Disneyland on February 27th and my mom passed on March 28th. So she got sick when we were there. And then when we got home, she ended up in the hospital. And then after the hospital, I made the decision to call in hospice, not even thinking she would qualify. And she qualified. She qualified on a Thursday and passed on a Monday, that following Monday. So it was
Wow.
so fast that I didn't really feel like I had any opportunity to process what was coming, right? I mean, we went to Disneyland. We're going to the happiest place on earth. I'm like, we're good, we're good. I can look back at pictures. I can look back at videos and now see that the progression had started before that. But in the moment, I couldn't see it, right? And I even have talked to my husband, since she's passed, and I noticed it, but I couldn't tell you that. And I didn't need to tell you that, right? Wasn't going to change the way you were caring for her in that moment. So why even be like, oh, I think she's progressing? We were fine. Things were okay. But I think what made it so hard to make that transition from caregiver Patti to Patti that's lost her mom is that I didn't have a long time in those later stages, right? Like it just was so quick. And so I didn't really have this opportunity to think about what was coming. And then when she passed, I mean, I was grieving a lot, right? I was grieving my best friend, my mom, the super important person in my life. I also had compound grief, I'd say, because my dad passed about 6 months before my mom passed. And so I didn't really have the opportunity to grieve because I was so deep in caregiving. And, as we know, people with dementia mimic emotions and behaviors. So we just kind of had to move on, right? Like I shared with her that her husband had passed. She had no recollection that she was married and had a husband, right? So she was sad that I had lost my dad. She was not sad that she had lost her husband. I made that choice. And I know that's not the right choice for everyone to tell them, but for us, it was.
Yes.
And I had all this grief. I had this grief of my dad. I had this grief of my mom. I had this grief of this new role that I actually really liked. I loved caring for my mom in some ways, right? We had a beautiful bond. It was this opportunity to reciprocate the love she gave me. I got to really do a lot of these things. I had given up my role as a teacher. So I really felt like I had no identity in that way and didn't really realize how closely I tied out outside factors to my internal identity. And so I felt really lost, right? What do I do? I'm not going back in the classroom. I'm not a teacher right now. I'm not caring for anyone. Like both the people I'm caring for have passed. And so who is Patti now? Who is Patti after that journey? And I knew that Patti after that journey would be different. You can't go that journey and not be different, but I didn't know how different I would feel.
Yeah. And this is something that I always, with my families that I work with, I always try to warn them, like that day is going to come, whether it's a move or bringing in another caregiver that you're, it's a role that you're playing as a caregiver. And when that's gone for whichever reason, it is so difficult. It's another loss. I think
Yeah.
you would add that to your compounding grief. Would you agree?
Yeah. 100%.
Another level.
For
So is this where you decided to step out and help other families because you are such a light for other caregivers. You have your Instagram, which, we were talking earlier, it is your personal Instagram.
Yeah, it was not meant to be.
And
Then
it
what
just
is it?
up.
Yeah, it was not meant to be what it is. But here it is.
How did that happen? Was it a situation where you were looking for resources to help you with your own grief? Like, how did you make that transition?
Can you clarify the question? Make the transition to my sharing on my Instagram or make the
Yeah.
transition to who I am now?
Who you are now. Was that
Uh,
filling in that void?
yeah, I mean, it was so interesting. When my mom passed and my dad had passed, I really just did what I think is probably an unhealthy coping when I look back now. But it was like I ran, right? Like distraction became my coping mechanism. So I had kind of all the things that I had to say no to for the last 3 years of my life, I said yes to, right? So I traveled and saw people that I hadn't seen in a while. I just traveled. I spent time with friends. I just really kept myself as busy as possible for 3 to 6 months, And then after that point, it was like, okay, now who is Patti? Who am I? And I kind of just dabbled in a lot of things. Like, where am I going to find my home after this journey? And I didn't feel like it was the classroom. The classroom was a beautiful place and I loved it so dearly, but it wasn't the class. There was a bigger purpose of why I walked this journey with my mom, of why I walked this journey with my dad. And so, I did some work in thinking about advocacy and sharing our story on social media and connecting with others and this idea around coaching. And then I had gotten connected with this beautiful nonprofit, Lorenzo's House, that I am currently working for. And it's just been this beautiful place to call home. That's this beautiful intersect between my background of working with youth. So I work with youth every day that have a parent walking with younger onset dementia. And another beautiful part of my life, which is a journey I had with my mom who had younger onset. So it was this beautiful combination of purpose and passion and background and skills. And I get this opportunity to walk with families. Was it immediate? No, it was a very long journey behind where I was going to fall. And also a really important journey for myself to also find myself. So I so often have learned that I really am someone who gets lost in roles and identities that are tied to external factors. And I don't identify my inner Patti, right? And so what this journey to where I have landed now has been this journey to really love myself and find my own Patti magic. I always say, love like Linda. And, mom got me here and she did. My mom got me here and she walks alongside me every day. But there's also this bit of Patti that has taken what I walked and has turned it into something that is so powerful for myself and for so many others that I get to connect with.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with taking 6 months and trying.
Yeah. For sure, for sure. I mean, society, what might say something different.
Well, I think it brings up another great point, which is not only is this journey so individual, but so is, the journey of caretaking, but so is the grief journey.
Yeah.
right? It's incredibly I was also younger, and it also happened quickly with my dad,
Ah,
and we didn't know anything. We knew nothing. And
yeah.
so, I always talk about in our experience, there were all these angels that sort of, whether it was the ER doctor or my uncle who told us about power of attorney, we didn't even know what that was. What, did you have those little angels for you?
Definitely these really beautiful people that you meet along the way. And for me, that's part of why when I started to share my story on socials, which was really unintentional, it was just that my mom was living with me. And so I just started posting about it and it was my personal, but I started to get connected with other young people that were similar age to me that were walking a similar journey. And so they became my angels. They became my community. They became those people that kind of helped you along the way. And even the first caregiver that we had for my mom was a friend, right? She was someone that was kind of a distant friend, but someone that I, had hung out with and felt really comfortable with. And she was a caregiver. And person that she was caring for had passed and she was looking to add another client. And it was right at the same time I was looking for support for my mom. And so she became such an angel for my family for so long.
Wow, I love that. And Patty, you are an angel, I think, for so many. I think I can say that confidently for so many people. And of course, we're going to put all of your links in our show notes, our doable download, and including your Instagram. So definitely want to encourage caregivers that are listening in to reach out. But Patty, we've talked about a lot of really great things today, but what would be your number one doable tip for family?
Find your community. So find those people that are going to be your tribe. They're going to be your people, whether that is the caregivers, right? Like paid caregivers, paid, care facility, whatever that looks like for supports for caring for your person. But also, what are those emotional supports? Is it your friends? Is it your families? Is it an online community? Is it a support group? I spent so many years of my journey trying to do it on my own and trying to not talk about it and trying to figure out what that meant and how to navigate and kind of avoiding this idea of talking about it. But once I found a community and I found others who got it, I mean, it just really changed the trajectory of my ability to care for my mom and the quality of care she received and the emotional support that I felt for myself.
Today's episode is brought to you by ClearPath Senior Living Solutions. ClearPath helps families find assisted living, memory care, and other resources. Find our contact information in today's show notes. Check out this episode's doable download in show notes for details including industry terms and definitions we discussed, as well as a bonus tip from our guest. Have questions or your own tips to share? Leave us a message. We'd love to hear from you. And until next time, make it doable.
I was going to say something about connection that we didn't really talk about connection and finding ways to connect with your person is so important because those little moments are what carries you through the hard times. And so, for example, with my mom was a huge quilter. She wasn't able to quilt anymore. So what we did is we creatively created art together. We would do abstract art. We would do collages as a way for her to ignite the creative part of her brain, but also allow for us to connect with each other. And through laughing and having fun and enjoying our time with art, it was able to remind me that we could still have this beautiful connection, even though she was walking with dementia.
I love that. And your videos also show that. You guys had so much.
No, we had fun. That's why I'm like, I know that a lot of people would be like, yeah, go, I had to quit my job to care for my mom. And I'm like, it felt like a vacation in a way, I mean, after working full time and caring for her full time, it was like, it was a vacation to only do one.
Only have one person instead of a classroom, full classroom.
True, but we had so much fun and she was so easygoing about stuff. That was so, I mean, it was hard because she was It was hard, right? But she was like, "Okay, I'll go to the store with you." She said yes. She was a yes girl.